Many accident reports from the NTSB list spatial disorientation in the probable cause findings. In this video, we will look at what spatial disorientation is, what are the causes of it, and some steps that pilots can take to help avoid an accident related to spatial disorientation. This video is produced by Bright Spot Schools and sponsored by Avemco Insurance. My name is Gene Benson, and I will be your narrator. Spatial disorientation is the mistaken perception of one's position and motion relative to the Earth. Our bodies are pretty good at determining our orientation, providing three systems are available. Our visual system is the most important. Our eyes play a crucial role in determining our orientation. Our vestibular system, relying on the motion of fluid in the semicircular canals of the inner ear, is next, but the system can be fooled. Finally, our somatosensory system, consisting of the nerves in our bodies, also play a role. This system can be easily overruled by the vestibular system, which might be confused if the visual system is impaired. So what happens when we are flying and deprived of a clear visual reference to the horizon? Our remaining systems may become confused and cause us to lose our orientation. In this program, we are not going to have a detailed study of the causes of spatial disorientation. We are going to concentrate on situations which may help induce the phenomenon and how to avoid accidents. So let's identify some risk factors for spatial disorientation accidents. These risk factors represent my opinion after studying many spatial disorientation accidents. They are reduced visibility, lack of proficiency, and physiology. The prime risk factor is, of course, flight in reduced visual conditions. The loss of a horizon reference, if only for a brief time, can induce the onset of spatial disorientation. We commonly think of losing our visual references if we fly into clouds. That will, of course, do the trick, but there are other situations that can produce the same effect. Basically, anything that prevents us from having a clearly defined horizon has the potential to make us susceptible to spatial disorientation. This would include VFR night flight when little or no horizon is visible due to lack of moonlight or uninhabited terrain below. It would also include VFR flight in haze or other phenomena causing reduced visibility, especially when flying over featureless terrain or open water. Of course, the king of all is continued VFR into IFR. The key word here is continued. If a pilot is not instrument rated and instrument proficient, the only logical maneuver to perform in case of an inadvertent encounter with instrument meteorological conditions is the 180-degree turn. The turn must be initiated immediately so that the airplane will fly out of the instrument conditions quickly, thereby reducing the likelihood of spatial disorientation. And of course, stay on the instruments and keep the bank shallow during the turn. Let's try to learn something from the mistakes of others by studying a few accidents. Here's our first example. This is a classic example of continued VFR flight into IFR conditions. The non-instrument rated private pilot and his passenger were killed when the airplane impacted a lake near Loudonsville, South Carolina. The flight departed a private airport near Maryville, Tennessee, and was en route to Athens, Georgia. There was no record of a weather briefing being received by the pilot, and no flight plan had been filed. There was no record of any communication with ATC, and no radar track for the accident airplane could be found, possibly indicating flight at very low altitude. The weather at the accident site consisted of a ceiling of approximately 300 feet AGL and visibility between 1/4 mile and 3 miles. Two witnesses heard the airplane make several passes over their location. One of the witnesses reported that the engine was making a pop-pop sound intermittently. Then it sounded like a lot of engine power was applied. They both reported that they had observed the airplane descending out of very low overcast cloud layer between 70 and 90 degrees nose-down attitude, with the wings level, on a path directly toward them. The airplane veered away from their location and then impacted into a lake approximately 75 feet from their location. Prior to impacting the water, one of the witnesses reported that several control surfaces appeared to be moving in the correct direction. These witnesses also reported that there had been rain just prior to the accident, and the overcast cloud layer was approximately 100 to 200 feet above treetop level, or about 300 feet above ground level. The National Transportation Safety Board determines the probable causes of this accident as follows: the pilot's inadequate pre-flight planning and improper decision to continue flight into deteriorating weather conditions, which resulted in spatial disorientation and after entering instrument flight conditions. As an aside from our discussion of spatial disorientation, let me just add something. Here's a bit more information from the NTSB report. The pilot had not held a valid medical certificate in more than 15 years. 2 sectional charts were located in the wreckage. One was 3 years old, the other was 4 years old. Probably neither of these facts contributed directly to the accident, but together they indicate a pattern of non-compliance behavior. Now, I'm not going to lecture anyone on compliance with regulations, and I'm not proposing that if a regulation is violated, an accident will necessarily occur. But beware the slippery slope of noncompliance. If we begin with a relatively minor violation, such as cheating by a few days on recent experience requirements, well, things can rapidly escalate to violations of VFR minimums, skipping medical exams, and putting all aircraft maintenance and inspections off. I have studied far too many accidents that follow that same scenario. It reminds me of an 18-wheeler heading down a steep hill with no brakes. You just know it isn't going to end well. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox on that one. So, forgetting the history of noncompliance, what could this pilot have done differently on this particular flight to avoid the accident? Well, first, getting a weather briefing would have made it obvious that VFR flight could not be accomplished over this route. In other words, the risk factor of reduced visibility could have been avoided. Second, a bit of proficiency training under the hood during the preceding year might have let him escape after flying into the clouds. Third, as soon as it became obvious that VFR flight at a reasonable and safe altitude could not be done, he could have turned around and landed somewhere to reevaluate. It's as simple as that. In contrast to our previously discussed pilot, this pilot appears to be completely legal. In fact, he was killed while flying to refresh his night flying skills. He was a non-instrument rated private pilot, age 74. A witness at the airport stated that the pilot told her he was going flying to work on night recurrency training. The weather was reported as wind from 060 degrees at 5 knots, visibility 10 miles, and sky clear. It was a very dark night. 2 witnesses reported hearing the engine noise increase and observing the airplane in a nosedive toward the ground. The airplane crashed into about 5 feet of water on a tidal mud flat. A Collier County Sheriff's Office helicopter pilot who responded to the accident site shortly after the accident reported that the lighting conditions were very dark and on a heading of 170 degrees provided no visual reference to a horizon looking out toward the Gulf of Mexico. He further reported that the lack of visual cues with the naked eye would have had required navigation by aircraft instrumentation. The National Transportation Safety Board determines the probable cause of this accident: the pilot's failure to maintain aircraft control due to spatial disorientation. Contributing to the accident was the night light conditions. So what could this pilot have done differently on this particular flight to avoid the accident? First, the risk factor of reduced visibility could have been avoided by not flying VFR on a night with no moon. Second, he was flying to gain proficiency or night experience. Taking an instructor along would have been an excellent insurance. Our second major risk factor is lack of proficiency. The risk of becoming spatially disoriented is reduced if we have reliable flight instruments and the current ability to use them properly. Note the phrase current ability. The ability to fly today by reference to instruments is not guaranteed by holding an instrument rating if the pilot is not proficient today. First, let's consider general proficiency. If a pilot is rusty or flying a more demanding airplane than usual, he or she is closer to task saturation and therefore less able to deal with a low visibility condition. Flying close to task saturation makes a pilot very susceptible to a loss of situational awareness, followed by a loss of spatial orientation in the event of a distraction or even a turbulence encounter. Then, of course, we have instrument proficiency. VFR pilots should periodically engage in some recurrent training in simulated instrument conditions to make sure that the airplane can be controlled long enough to turn around and fly out of the conditions. Instrument pilots must not only comply with recent experience requirements, but should go beyond the minimums to make sure their proficiency fits the kind of instrument flying they are reasonably expecting to do. For example, a pilot who does a few instrument approaches on a calm day under the foggles at the home airport in a Cessna 172 just might not be safe to take a bonanza on a night IFR flight to an unfamiliar airport in rain and turbulence. Then there's the issue of the traditional steam gauges versus glass cockpits. The high-tech displays and automation can quickly turn from an asset to a liability if the pilot is not proficient in their use. An instrument rating doesn't help if proficiency isn't maintained. This accident involved an instrument-rated private pilot, age 59, in an RV-6. He was on a cross-country flight from Somerville, Tennessee to Borger, Texas. No flight plan was filed. The purpose of the trip was to fly to his work location. The pilot and sole occupant of the airplane was killed when he lost control of the airplane in instrument flight conditions near Muskogee, Oklahoma. Weather radar from Fort Smith, Arkansas indicated scattered light to moderate rain showers over northeastern Oklahoma. A short line of thunderstorms with moderate to heavy rain was indicated to the south of the accident location. A light rain shower was indicated in vicinity of the eastern part of the town of Muskogee at the approximate time of the accident. Bases of the lowest cloud layer were generally reported between 800 feet and 1,000 feet above ground level. Satellite images showed cloud tops above 30,000 feet. Air traffic control radar tracked a 1,200 code transponder starting at 1,300 and about 29 miles northeast of the accident location at 4,500 feet MSL. The radar track proceeded west at 4,500 feet MSL until 1310. About 11 miles north of the accident location, the track then began climbing and turning south, then east, leveling at 8,500 MSL at 1316. The track then began a level, right-turning corkscrew pattern that terminated about 1/4 mile northeast of the accident location. The fourth, third, and second to last radar tracks, recorded approximately 4 seconds apart, depicted altitudes of 8,500, 8,400, and 8,300 feet MSL respectively. The last return was recorded at 18, 23, and 38 and 18 seconds after the 8,300 MSL return and recorded an altitude of 0. The last return was located about 1/4 mile northwest of the accident location. According to the pilot's wife, he was flying cross-country to his work location and he checked weather on the internet before departing. She said he had delayed his departure due to marginal weather conditions en route and he preferred VFR conditions. An examination of the pilot's logbook indicated an estimated total flight time of 605.2 hours, of which 132 hours were in this make and model of airplane. He logged 15.2 hours in the past 90 days and 5 hours in the past 30 days. His last noted flight review was completed 18 months before the accident. The pilot had logged 32 actual instrument hours and 41.8 simulated instrument hours. The last entry for actual instrument time was dated almost 5 years prior to the accident. The last entry for simulated instrument time was 0.6 hours during his last flight review. The last entry for simulated instrument time prior to his flight review was nearly 4 years prior to the accident. The National Transportation Safety Board determines the probable cause of this accident as follows: the pilot's improper decision to continue flight under visual flight rules into an area of reduced visibility weather conditions, which resulted in the pilot's spatial disorientation and subsequent loss of aircraft control. Contributing to the accident was the pilot's lack of recent experience flying in instrument conditions. Here's some additional information which may or may not be relevant. Toxicology testing revealed the presence of an antidepressant drug in the pilot's liver and kidneys. The regional flight surgeon stated that the use of this medication would have precluded medical certification of this pilot. The pilot had reported neither the use of the medication nor the condition for which it was prescribed on his most recent medical certificate application. Also, a diabetic test kit was found in the luggage removed from the wreckage. According to the pilot's wife, he had recently been diagnosed with diabetes at a routine checkup. So what can we learn from this accident? Well, first, the possession of an instrument rating is meaningless if proficiency isn't maintained. Instrument flying is not like riding a bicycle. Next, pilots must avoid overconfidence and relying on outdated instrument skills. Overconfidence kills. Finally, hiding a medical condition and a medication use from an AME is dangerous. Finally, under proficiency, we will discuss the danger of transitioning to a glass cockpit without adequate training in the use of the equipment. The instrument-rated private pilot, age 63, and his pilot-rated passenger were killed in Alabama when airplane control was lost due to spatial disorientation. The pilot-rated passenger was the builder of the airplane. Instrument conditions prevailed and an IFR flight plan had been filed. The pilot requested a VOR approach to an airport. Thereafter, he began a descent from cruise flight into instrument meteorological conditions. The controller cleared the airplane for the approach about 20 miles north of the airport. The airplane then began a descending right turn, and the pilot requested, and was provided, vectors to another airport. While en route to that airport, he amended his request and asked for vectors to a third airport, stating that he had required an airport with an ILS approach. The controller subsequently provided vectors followed by an ILS approach clearance. Shortly after receiving the clearance, the airplane flew past the ILS localizer path and the controller canceled the approach clearance. The pilot then requested an airport with cloud bases 2,000 feet or higher, and the controller advised him to check the weather at a nearby airport. The airplane then began a rapid descending right turn, followed by a steep climbing right turn. The airplane then began another rapid descent and was destroyed when it collided with wooded terrain. Throughout the approach portions of the flight, the airplane deviated multiple times from assigned altitudes and headings. The airplane was equipped with an LCD avionics suite in a configuration commonly referred to as a glass cockpit. No logbook entries were noted indicating that the instrument-rated pilot had flight experience in the accident airplane, and the majority of his flight experience in IMC took place in his own airplane, Cessna 177 Cardinal. The airplane was equipped with conventional flight instruments. Review of the pilot records revealed that as of about 2 weeks prior to the accident, he had accumulated about 1,770 total hours of flight experience, which included about 358 hours in actual instrument conditions. According to the logbook, the pilot accumulated 6.4 hours of total flight experience in instrument conditions for the 6 months preceding the accident. During that time, he performed 3 instrument approaches in instrument meteorological conditions and 1 practice instrument approach in visual meteorological conditions. This was accomplished in the Cardinal with traditional flight instruments and navigation equipment, as well as a considerably slower airspeed. The National Transportation Safety Board determines the probable cause of this accident as follows: the pilot in command's in-flight loss of control due to spatial disorientation. Contributing to the accident were the weather conditions and the pilot in command's lack of flight experience in the accident airplane. So what can we learn from this accident? First, instrument proficiency may be transferable from one airplane to another, providing both are equipped with similar instrumentation and they both have similar performance. And again, possession of an instrument rating does not constitute a silver bullet for flight and instrument conditions. Our third major risk factor is concerned with our physiology at the time of the flight. If we are not feeling well, we are not at the top of our game and we'll be operating to some degree closer to task saturation. It is human nature to head for the medicine chest to find something to relieve the symptoms of a cold, a cough, or some other condition. But unfortunately, many medications, including over-the-counter medications, can greatly increase the susceptibility to spatial disorientation. Some medications will also produce drowsiness or even lower the altitude at which hypoxia can occur. Hypoxia will increase our susceptibility to spatial disorientation. The only safe approach is to have any medications cleared by an aviation medical examiner before taking them and flying. Also, we can't forget that any amount of alcohol in the system can cause several problems, all of which can increase the likelihood of spatial disorientation. Finally, fatigue is a physiological risk factor for all aspects of flight, but can significantly increase pilot susceptibility to spatial disorientation. Fatigue can be chronic or acute, and it may not be recognized by the pilot. It could be the subject of a whole program, but just be aware of flying after a long day of work or after a night without sufficient sleep. This accident illustrates how external forces sometimes have a negative impact on a pilot's decision-making. The commercial instrument-rated pilot and his 3 passengers were killed when he experienced spatial disorientation and crashed into the water on a dark night. In this case, the pilot was experienced in current. He flew the accident airplane regularly in both VFR and IFR conditions, both during the day and at night. The 2 couples departed Gainesville at about 4:30 p.m. to have dinner at Cedar Key. This was a tradition to have dinner together to celebrate each other's birthdays. All 4 were professional people. They had attempted to schedule this dinner on several previous occasions. The schedules all came together on this particular day. But there was one problem. The pilot was suffering from a cold and a cough. The accident occurred at about 8 p.m. as the pilot departed for the return flight to Gainesville. This flight was in February and it was dark. The night was clear with 10 miles visibility. A memorial located at the end of runway 23, which had been placed there after a 1980 aircraft accident, warned pilots that a horizon will not be present during night takeoff to the west. Personnel at the restaurant were interviewed and reported that no alcohol was ordered or consumed during the time the 2 couples were there. The toxicology testing found a very slight amount of alcohol present in the pilot's blood. The amount is probably consistent with use of an over-the-counter cold or cough medication. But the toxicology test reported several ingredients in the pilot's blood and urine that are used in over-the-counter cold and cough remedies. All of these substances can produce numerous side effects which are not compatible with flying, especially with night flying. So perhaps the pilot was not feeling well but did not want to cancel the outing because of the difficulty expected in rescheduling. Perhaps he attempted to alleviate his symptoms with the use of 1 or more over-the-counter medications. Perhaps the use of the medications did not contribute to the accident, but perhaps this experienced and proficient pilot would not have become spatially disoriented had he not taken these drugs. Or did congestion or some other effect of the cold contribute to the spatial disorientation? We will never know for sure. The National Transportation Safety Board determines the probable cause or causes of this accident as follows: the failure of the pilot to maintain control of the airplane due to spatial disorientation, resulting in the airplane descending and colliding with water. A factor in the accident was a dark night. Adding to this tragedy is the fact that the pilot and his wife left behind a 9-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son. I follow up on many fatal accidents, and in many cases the loss of life in the accident is only the beginning of the tragedy when the impact on the family is considered. I met a man once who always carried a laminated photo of his young daughter in his wallet and a roll of tape in his flight bag. As part of his pre-flight checklist, he taped the picture to a spot on the panel that did not obscure anything important, but was in his field of view. He said that kept him from doing anything that wasn't safe. Maybe that's not a bad idea. So what can we learn from this accident? It is best to avoid flying when not feeling well, and it is clearly risky to use medications that have not been specifically cleared by the AME. This accident involved a Beech A-36 Bonanza. The pilot, who was the sole occupant, was killed. The flight had originated in Lake Havasu, Arizona. It was on an IFR flight plan. No alternate airport was filed, even though it was required based on the weather conditions. The pilot was age 41 and held a private pilot certificate with an instrument rating. He had accumulated about 900 hours total flight time, with 41 hours of actual instrument time and 6.6 hours of simulated instrument time. He had 11.1 hours in complex airplanes, all of which were in the accident airplane. All of the logged complex airplane time had been accumulated in a 6-day period, about 2 months prior to the accident. The CFI who performed the pilot's complex training in the accident airplane stated that she did not give him any instrument flight instruction during his transition to the Bonanza or at any other time. The weather during the period of about a half hour before the accident to about a half hour after the accident was pretty consistent at a ceiling of 100 feet and a visibility of 1/4 mile, and was reported by the ASOS. The landing minima was 200 feet for the ceiling and 3/4 mile visibility. The tower controller relayed to the pilot that the runway visual range was 1,600 feet, which is 1/4 mile. Winds were 280 degrees at 5 knots, and the flight was cleared to land on runway 24. About 2 minutes later, the tower controller issued the pilot a low altitude alert, followed by a notification that it appeared that the pilot was south of course. About 2 minutes later, the pilot transmitted that he was going to abort the approach. The pilot's last transmission, 1 minute later, stated, "I'm in trouble." Despite numerous attempts, no further communications with the pilot were established. Radar control indicated that 2 miles from the approach end of the runway, the airplane crossed over the final approach course at 800 feet MSL, heading south. The track started a tight left-hand turn with altitude readings that fluctuated between 600 and 1100 feet MSL. The last radar return depicted the airplane at 900 feet MSL and at a ground speed of 56 knots. The airplane wreckage was located 3.3 miles southeast of the approach end of runway 24, in the same vicinity as the last radar return. The NTSB report cites the FAA Instrument Flying Handbook section on spatial disorientation, implying that the pilot most likely became disoriented. The NTSB report also notes the toxicology report. It stated that ethanol was detected in the blood, urine, brain, and muscle, and propanol was detected in the blood, urine, and muscle. No other legal or illegal drugs were detected. The National Transportation Board determines the probable cause of this accident as the pilot's failure to maintain control during the instrument approach and attempted go-around. So what can we learn from this accident? Here is some considered speculation. This one accident might just illustrate all of our major risk factors for spatial disorientation. There was certainly reduced visibility. The pilot was in solid IMC during the approach. We listed proficiency as a risk factor. The pilot had recently transitioned to this high-performance airplane and had not received any instrument training in it. It isn't reported what kind of airplane he had been flying previously, but if his instrument experience was limited to much slower and less complex airplanes, such as a 172 or a Piper Warrior, he might have been in a bit over his head in the Bonanza, attempting to execute an ILS approach to minimums or below. There might also have been an external factor causing him to feel pressure to complete this flight. Recall that he did not file an alternate airport. Perhaps that indicates a mild mindset that he was going to land at his destination no matter what. Finally, there is the matter of the alcohol in the toxicology report. The report doesn't state the concentration, and impairment isn't mentioned in the probable cause. There is no indication as to the source of the alcohol, but maybe there was just enough effect to hasten the onset of spatial disorientation. What main takeaways do we have from this presentation? First, do thorough pre-flight planning and have a plan B to avoid unintentional flight into IMC. Second, whether instrument rated or not, maintain proficiency in attitude instrument flying just in case. And finally, consider physiology before beginning a flight. The I'm Safe checklist is a pretty good tool for that. In case you did not know, Avemco offers a safety rewards program. By watching this video, attending any of my other safety events, or taking any safety-based educational courses, you can receive a percentage off your annual Avemco premium at the time of quote or renewal. Just let Avemco know. Thanks for watching this video. Please consider giving a like or comment, and please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. And also, please check out our website, vectorsforsafety.com, and sign up for our free monthly publication titled, You Got It, Vectors for Safety. And please remember, always fly like your life depends on it. I'm Gene Benson.